Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist, and I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation as of September the 29th. So please join, watch this video, like it, subscribe, and leave your comments just below the video. I'll start with Ukrainian deep strike. Actually, not so deep, but by the way, strikes, missile strikes to the Russian Belgorod. Let's take some overview what is going right now there. Let's probably start with some truly good news, some genuinely satisfying news for many Ukrainians. We're talking about strikes on the territory of Belgorod region, specifically the Russian city of Belgorod, or rather on the local Belgorod CHP plant. The very next day after the absolutely insane, totally terrorist shelling of Kiev, the capital, when the Russians caused civilian casualties, when in the suburbs of Kiev they practically wiped out an entire street in Petropavlivska, Bolshahivka, a missile strike was carried out, apparently, on the Belgorod CHP plant, which led to a complete power outage, a blackout, in this Russian city. Here's how the locals reacted to this fact. Vovk, this is Belgorod. Basically, there's no electricity anywhere in Belgorod at all. Russians need to understand a very simple thing. This is no longer 2022. Ukraine is no longer so toothless. Ukraine now has its own means of striking back, and Ukraine will respond. Well, yes, of course, I understand that many Ukrainians would like this eye for an eye response to be at the level where one strike on Kiev would be answered by one similar strike on Moscow. But we need to realize that, of course, Ukraine is not that kind of country. And the president mentioned this in his interview with Axios, saying that we will not carry out terrorist strikes on the Russian capital, even despite all our hatred toward Russians, but we will strike at infrastructure, critical and military targets. These are the tasks currently facing the Ukrainian military. Undoubtedly, such strikes will be carried out. I am convinced of this. For those skeptics who are now going to write in the comments, so where are our flamingos? Listen, don't be defeatist. You know what comes next? There's no need to indulge in this defeatism. In reality, both our flamingos and all our other missiles, I think they are following their own logical path of development, and they will get there, just like our drones once did. Remember how they flew over Moscow City, and were like little mosquitoes that just bit, and, well, at most, what kind of damage did they cause back then? Well, maybe a window got broken somewhere in Moscow City or something like that. Now, these drones are actually destroying almost completely, well, okay, not completely, but they are seriously hitting the oil and gas sector of the Russian Federation when refineries are burning every other day or even every day because of Ukrainian drones. It will be the same with the missiles. This will take some time, and I am convinced that time will come. Quietly and stealthily, it will get there. Yes, we all want this to happen faster. But I'll say it again, this is no longer 2022. Ukraine definitely already has the means not just to respond, but to strike hard, to strike in such a way that the Russians understand what it means to bring the war onto the territory of the Russian Federation. And this, in essence, is one of the main tasks for the Ukrainian military, for Ukraine as a whole, to bring the war onto the territory of the aggressor country. And don't say later, Russians, that you weren't warned. All the more so since at the end of last week, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said that in response to the Kremlin's war crimes, blackouts await them, although the Russians will try to hit us with blackouts. This will be a very tough fight, just as tough as the fighting currently taking place in the Kupiansk direction. Let's begin our analysis of the battle map based on the weekend's results with this direction, because in Kupiansk, as the head of the Kupiansk city military administration stated yesterday, entry to the city is prohibited for anyone except the military. This means that as of today, the situation in Kupiansk is truly critically difficult. Andriy Besedin, the head of the Kupiansk military administration, said that the situation is critical. The enemy is still present in the city. His sabotage and reconnaissance groups are in the city, and right now a counter-sabotage operation is underway and still ongoing. I already gave an explanation for this at the end of last week. Well, in fact, the Russians entered Kupiansk in quite large numbers during their first attempt to break into the city, and driving them out now is an extremely difficult task. I don't want to say that it's impossible, but it is extremely difficult, because Kupiansk is not just a small village with 3 houses. It's a large city with shelters, ruins, basements, and until recently there were still stores where you could find supplies. In people's basements, you can find some preserves, you can find civilian clothing. Listen, you can find a lot of things, a blanket so you don't freeze, just so you don't become numb from the cold. All of this is available in the large city of Kupiansk. That's why it's still there today. There are enemies in it, there are their sabotage and reconnaissance groups, and today the city is closed to entry for everyone except the military. It is now a closed zone. This means that evacuation from the city is impossible. That is, no one, not even volunteers, can get to the city. The evacuation process has become as difficult as possible. The only option for civilians to evacuate, to leave, is to walk out of the territory of Kupiansk. But it's important to be aware that the Russians are also taking civilians hostage there, just as they did in the Lyman direction south of Kupiansk, which in fact contributed to the Russian advance, particularly in the direction of the settlement of Shandry-Holov. This is one of the locations, basically, of the Lyman front. So Shandry-Holov is right here for us. I have already explained more than once what its significance is. The Russians want to reach Novoselyivka and Drobyshev, which are the logistical routes for Lyman. In addition, they are trying to form a second, let's say, pincer by advancing through Yampil, where the enemy has also made gains recently. And both in Yampil and in Shandry-Holov, the Russians are using the civilian population. They use them as human shields to cover themselves, to move from house to house, and to preserve their own lives, so to speak, under the fire of our drones. And not only drones, because, for example, in the Lyman direction, Ukrainian aviation is currently operating extremely actively. And lately, there has just been an incredible amount of footage of Ukrainian aviation strikes. Well, let's start with Torske. Torske is the area of responsibility of the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade. It's part of the Lyman direction. And the 63rd Mechanized Brigade now belongs to the 3rd Army Corps. And accordingly, aviation in this area has also demonstrated its strikes on the enemy concentration in Torske. Here is the footage of the strike on the spot where enemy infantry had gathered, where they were simply accumulating in large numbers. Right now, in fact, our aviators have a lot of work to do. You can't say that they have significantly more resources now. So far, you still can't say that Ukraine has the means for strikes like the same cabs, but there are American GBUs and French ASM hammer bombs. They are in principle integrated into all types of Ukrainian aviation, and our aviators are constantly delivering a lot of strikes on enemy positions. And in the Lyman direction, this is now very often visualized. This video, for example, we saw from Torske. Now, actually more than 2 episodes, I will show in total from the crossings over the Zherebets River. Here in the Lyman direction, the Zherebets River winds its way through. All of this is the Zherebets River, and along it, quite a lot of strikes are being carried out by our troops, particularly in the settlement of Ivanivka. Such strikes are taking place. To the north, there are the Juravka ravines. That's where, to the north, let's say, of Ivanivka, the strikes are taking place. And all of this we can see in this video from our aviators. Specifically, the strikes on the crossings over the Zherebets River. What are they for? Why do they exist? Is it to disrupt logistics? It's to take out logistics. It's about immobilizing the enemy's logistics, which in this area have to move across the river, of course. But thanks to the work of our aviation, we see that this significantly complicates the Russians' operations in this direction. Next, I'll talk about logistics, referring to the Pokrovsk direction. And there are quite a lot of, let's say, logistical achievements that our troops have managed to accomplish there. At the very least, we are making the most of the logistical opportunities that nature provides us here, specifically the Zherebets River. Our troops in this section of the front are working on the crossings over it. Once again, let me remind you, these are the bridges in the settlements of Ivanivka and Balky Dzuravki.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
There are many crossings there. Russians are setting up a lot of them over the Zherebets because essentially this is the only direction where they can organize their offensive in the Lyman sector. At the moment, it's not to say that this offensive is maximally complicated, but the very fact that the enemy is already present on the right bank of the Zherebets River is a negative development. However, the fewer logistical opportunities the enemy has during such an advance, the better it will undoubtedly be for our troops. And this is exactly what our aviators are working on in this direction. In fact, aviation is working very actively here. Let's talk further about another direction. This is the Novopavlivsk section of the front. This is another direction. I promised that we would get to Pokrovsk, but we'll only get to it at the very end of this review. The Novopavlivsk section of the front is the junction of the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovsk regions. As is customary for this kind of coverage, I outlined the borders of the Donetsk, Dnipropetrovsk, and Zaporizhzhia regions. So these are the borders of Donetsk region, and this is the strip that separates Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk. This is ZP, Zaporizhzhia, and this, let's just call it D for Dnipropetrovsk region, and this is DN, Donetsk region. Accordingly, right here, At the junction of these three regions, some of the most active fighting is taking place along almost the entire front line, because unfortunately, it is in this location that the enemy is making advances, and they actually remain to some extent unstoppable. I would put it that way, unstoppable. There are a number of settlements here. Even in the latest updates on the deep state map, we can see these constant advances. If we scroll through the entire past week, then almost every day, actually not even almost, but every day, new areas appear where these shaded territories are also visualized. These are the settlements of Kalinivske, Berezove, Sosnivka, Novohrihorivka, Novoivanivka, even in the direction of Uspenivka and the area around Olhivske. Everywhere here, the enemy has advanced over the past week, and unfortunately, these are rather steady rates where you can't really say at all that the enemy has been stopped. And I, in particular, just last week, at the end of last week, referring to the topic that supposedly Western media were writing about, like maybe the Ukrainian offensive or maybe something else. So I said, well, listen, the basic first pillar, so to speak, of any counteroffensive action is not being fulfilled, namely stopping the enemy in the direction of their advance. Next comes cutting off their reserves, plus forming our own reserves. We are not coping with this task at the first stage. So what kind of offensives can we even talk about? Also, there is increased attention from the enemy on the northern flank of this border between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Specifically, this concerns three villages. The three villages are Ivanivka, Filiya, and Dachne. Of all these three villages, Dachne was the first, let's say, in the chronology of the enemy's attempts to advance into the Dnipropetrovsk region. Right now, there are no enemy forces here. In fact, there is basically no village here anymore. After Dachne, the next target was Filiya. And by the way, more and more videos are now appearing from our soldiers in Filiya who are defending this area, specifically from the 46th Separate Air Mobile Brigade, from our paratroopers who are destroying the enemy in the forest near Filiya. Basically, the forest in this area is and remains the main zone of fighting. Here is this forested area. I've highlighted it. And here is the settlement of Filiya. In fact, in this forested area, the Russians are constantly entrenching themselves, and from here they attack the settlement itself. Our paratroopers are constantly carrying out counter-assault actions toward the forest. But it's worth noting that this forest is truly a classic gray zone along the current line of contact, because within this gray zone, there is drone control from both the enemy and our forces. Accordingly, this is a classic gray zone where it is very difficult, truly difficult, to survive. And well, the Russians, who generally are not overly concerned about their significant losses, for now are actively sending a substantial number of their infantry forces into the dense forest to the west, specifically toward Filiya, and from that strategic location they then launch their aggressive attacks. On the deep state resource, you can see how Russians are being destroyed in these fields and forests by our 46th Separate Air Mobile Brigade. But this video, for understandable reasons, humanitarian ones, since YouTube is a humanitarian platform, does not allow showing strikes against the enemy. I can't show it here, but I will post it, for example, on my Telegram channel, which I invite you friends to join. You can find the Pekhno news in the Telegram search feed, my personal blog, the Pekhno blog, named after my own surname. So I encourage you to join, subscribe, and be active users, so that ultimately you can even see footage of strikes against the enemy in the area of the settlement of Filiya. Another settlement, which now, since Dachne has fallen, Filiya is also falling, the Russians will be moving toward Ivanivka. Recently, there have already been recorded movements of the enemy here, including successful attempts to cross the Vovcha River in the Novopavlivsk direction. Well, I strongly suspect that going forward, we will undoubtedly see more and more significant attention paid to this crucial section of the front, particularly in detailed map reviews by Deep State and other similar analytical groups. Now, let's carefully move on to Pokrovsk, everyone, and thoroughly discuss what's currently happening in this specific area. Here, I want to place particular emphasis on logistics. Once again, we will be talking, of course, about the Dobropilya direction, where the Russians have 3 pockets, which have already been confirmed, not just by anyone, but by a very serious authority. Recently, the Times did not just conduct an interview, but actually made a report from the headquarters of the brigade, actually not a brigade, sorry, but the National Guard Corps, the 1st National Guard Corps, Azov, and spoke directly with the Chief of Staff of the Azov Corps. This is Lieutenant Colonel Arsen Dmitrik, call sign Lemko. So, Lemko himself confirmed to them in the report the existence of these 3 cauldrons for the Russians. And these are, well, some of the most authoritative people in the Azov Corps military. Who else could be more authoritative to speak truthfully about the fact that the Russians have these cauldrons? Secondly, Lemko told the Times journalists some very interesting things about the concentration of forces, about the balance of power in the Dobropilia direction. There are 40,000 of us there and 100,000 Russians. And we won, says Lemko, here thanks to maneuverable defense and quick high-quality decisions. Thirdly, what does Lieutenant Colonel Dmitrik say? He explains how this was achieved. First and foremost, by achieving coordination among the units that were subordinated to the Azov Corps. And from this coordination comes the destruction of enemy logistics under such conditions of cohesion. As a result, we now have Russians cut off in 3 pockets, their logistics severed, and the units of the 51st Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation unable to be supplied. In an attempt to rescue them, Marine units that were redeployed here from the Kursk region are being thrown into the fight. And these Marines now, instead of advancing on Pokrovsk or Mirnohrad, are dealing with the task of rescuing the blocked units in these 3 pockets. Accordingly, it's actually hard to overestimate the actions carried out here by the units subordinated to the 1st Corps of the National Guard of Ukraine, Azov, because I would venture to suggest that, in fact, with this successful defense, with this encirclement in the pockets, they are disrupting the enemy's offensive. They are generally thwarting the enemy's advance on Pokrovsk. Because remember, from the beginning of September until today, the Russians should have already launched a major offensive on Pokrovsk with a powerful strike force. This was supposed to happen about 2 weeks ago, but as of today, it still hasn't happened because right now Russian troops here are preoccupied with trying to save the situation of the 51st Combined Arms Army, whose units are encircled. These are the pockets shown on the deep state map. Let me repeat, the 51st CAA stands for Combined Arms Army. And in fact, the enemy's offensive on Pokrovsk is largely being disrupted. And what is logistics, friends? Now I will show you a video from the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk, from the 155th Mechanized Brigade of our defense forces, that's Anna Kivska, which demonstrates what disrupted logistics looks like. That's 47 destroyed enemy vehicles south of Pokrovsk, all on a single road, a narrow strip. Here, with specific confirmation of these vehicles that have been destroyed, which tried to advance toward the city. I think that at one time, Madhya also showed a lot of destroyed enemy equipment here. I don't know how many of them, so to speak, are Madhyas and how many are new. But the very fact is, well, here it's what? 500 meters of road, no more, and 47 destroyed vehicles. This is the result, in fact, of successful strikes on enemy logistics, which in many ways wins the war. I don't want to say that everything is fine on our side. I don't want to say, especially God forbid, that we are winning the war. I want to say that our defense forces are truly doing fantastic things. Aviators, ground forces, and all components of the defense forces who are working, artillerymen, drone operators, everyone is doing simply fantastic things that allow us to live and to rejoice. For example, when something hits Belgorod and the lights go out there. Belgorod is just the first step. There will be more to come. Next will be Moscow and St. Petersburg. I'm sure of it. Do you think the same way? Write in the comments. Friends, thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best and see you again soon.